everybody. This is Dr. Lori Shemek.
And I'm Omar Cumberbatch. You're listening to This Podcast Burns Fat. Hey, Lori, how are you?
Hi, Omar. Doing great. Thank you. Beautiful weather we're having here.
Yeah, same here,
Dallas.
actually.
Yeah. Yay. Finally, spring is here.
Yeah,
Unless
no.
you live in the, where did I see they have snow in California?
Yeah,
Northern
I heard about
California.
that.
Yeah.
That is crazy,
I
but hey,
know.
listen, better them than us, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, we're on a good streak. We have another topic that we haven't touched in, our
Mm-hmm.
many episodes, and is brought to us by Ashok Gupta, and he is the founder of the Gupta Program. And it was about neuroimmune condition syndrome, right? And he has a way
Mm-hmm.
that he actually retrains your brain to deal with some of these ailments that a lot of the medicines just weren't necessarily working for. So I found that this topic very fascinating.
Yeah, I did too. I did too. It's really interesting because, when you see the research that comes out, the people that do really well in terms of recovery or trying to get over a health condition or going through a health condition do best when they have brain training, if you will. So he was wonderful in terms of showing us, telling us how to get to the root of a problem, how to get unstuck and rewire our brain, essentially.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So yeah, definitely a good episode to look in and discover like a new way
Hmm.
of looking at some of these things, right? So yeah,
Right.
let's jump into it.
Okay.
Hey, Ashok, how are you today? Welcome to the show.
Yes, I'm great. Thank you, Omar. Fantastic to be here.
Wonderful, Ashok
Mhm.
Gupta. Thank you for dropping by. We're really happy to have you here. And, we're going to be discussing something that I think is important to a lot of people because a lot of people have Lyme disease or fibromyalgia, et cetera. And
Mhm.
you've been helping many people with that, with those conditions. And so I would like to know what inspired you to develop the program you have called the Gupta Program. And was there a personal experience or a specific moment that prompted its creation?
Yes, like many of us who've been through health challenges, we often come to this area wanting to help other people as a result of our own experiences. And I also suffered from ME and chronic fatigue syndrome when I was studying as an undergrad at Cambridge University. And I remember as a young man, I was in the prime of my life, had the whole adventures ahead of me, and suddenly I got some kind of virus that I didn't recover from. And I went from doctor to doctor, and they would tell me, look, we don't know what causes this. You may have this for the rest of your life. And, I remember in my worst moments, I had to crawl to the bathroom. I couldn't even read a textbook. And I just thought to myself, how can this be happening? Yeah. And I
Mm-hmm.
met hundreds of others who suffered from similar conditions, such as Lyme disease and mold and pain syndromes like fibromyalgia. And I made a promise with the universe. I said, if I can just get myself well, even if it's just 30, 40, 50% better, I will dedicate the rest of my life to help others with these types of conditions because there is so much suffering that's going on as a result of it. And so I experimented with my own brain in an ad hoc manner, managed to retrain my brain and get myself 100% well. And ever since then, I've been supporting others with chronic diseases.
So your category, I guess you would consider like this chronic disease category is, I understand is NICS, which is a acronym from Neuroimmune Condition Syndrome. What does that encompass? And like what were the things that we can exactly understand that is categorized as that particular or those particular conditions?
Yeah, so this is a phrase that we actually created to describe the whole range of different illnesses. So
Gotcha.
at one spectrum, you have a lot of these what we call pure neuroimmune conditions. So that's things like long COVID, which now millions of people around the world are suffering from, ME and chronic fatigue syndrome, and to an extent fibromyalgia. And those neuroimmune conditions are where the immune system is almost over triggered and causing excess inflammation in the body, which causes the symptoms. Then a second category are kind of autoimmune diseases where the immune system is attacking it's the whole its own body, and we're having some success with that as well. And then another area is pain syndromes. And then finally, these kind of sensitivity illnesses. So those are illnesses like mold disease, chemical sensitivities, where we're reacting to some kind of external pathogen continuously. So the whole range of different diseases, which modern medicine finds it very difficult to treat, because we think these are software issues, not hardware issues. So if there's any kind of IT geeks listening, this is an analogy that many people find very useful, which is that modern medicine is very good at treating things which are related to the physiological body, the things we can measure, so muscles, cells. But actually, we've got this whole nervous system, which is like the electrical system of your car, that wires everything together and sends instructions, with the brain being the kind of head of the nervous system. And that electrical system is what I believe malfunctions in so many of these different diseases. And that's where brain retraining, neuroplasticity offers so much promise, and I think is the new exciting area of medicine.
So essentially, you're saying that it is more of a mind issue, a brain issue when you have something like Lyme disease?
Right, so we have to be very careful here. We're definitely not saying it's a mind issue. So we are differentiating between the mind and the brain. And so what I would say is that, of course, things like Lyme disease, mold illness, there are so many physical symptoms that we can measure in the physical body, and changes in inflammatory markers in the body and also in the brain. But that the perpetuating system is in the unconscious brain itself. So someone is not at fault for what they're experiencing, but that their immune system becomes dysregulated. And because it becomes dysregulated, it starts causing a lot of these downstream symptoms, and also allows opportunistic infections to flourish. And something that may help, there's an analogy that I use that might help a lot of people when it comes to mold and Lyme specifically, if I can share that. So imagine that you are, I don't know, are you guys fans of Game of Thrones by any chance?
Oh, I am. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, good. So this will resonate with you. But people listening, if they're not such a fan of that particular program, then just any old fairy tale will do. So imagine you are king or queen of your kingdom. Okay, so you are the rational, conscious, prefrontal cortex part of the mind. You are king and queen of your kingdom. Yeah? And your kingdom represents your body. And most of us have, well, not most of us, all of us have an immune system and nervous system. So your immune system is the navy, which protects your kingdom. And the army is your nervous system that also protects the kingdom. Yeah, so far, so good. And so let's say now an army comes over the hill. So that could be the Lyme Borrelia infection, that could be mold exposure, that could be pain, it could be COVID. An invader comes over the body. So your army and navy, they work together synchronously to defend the kingdom and fight off the invading army. But now imagine that you have a drought in the kingdom, yeah, which means that your body is slightly weaker than it is normally, or perhaps it's fighting some other danger, some other battle somewhere. And this time, because there's a drought, your army and navy is weaker than it used to be. So in comes the Lyme infection, or in comes the mold exposure. This time, your army and navy have to work twice as hard to get rid of that invader. And they work valiantly, but they become traumatized by that experience, because survival, guess what, is our #1 priority. The brain's #1 priority, your immune system, your nervous system. We're here to thrive, and certainly not thrive, but survive. And that is the priority. So our army and navy just about managed to fight off the invading army, but it leaves them traumatized, and they say to you, the king or queen, they come for your weekly meeting and they say, hey, we need all the resources of the body now. So we need all the wheat, the corn, the iron. We need all the resources to be channeled to defense, because we don't know if we've got rid of the invader. Yeah. So now the kingdom is weaker fighting off the Lyme and mold, because now it's an ongoing battle. But what then happens is the army and navies, they fight off their war machines. Some of those arrows fall back into the kingdom, affecting the kingdom itself, making the kingdom itself weaker. And secondly, the nervous system and immune system become highly sensitized. So even a small amount of mold, or even the potential of an opportunistic trigger or opportunistic infection like Lyme, may then trigger the full-blown defense, the inflammatory markers, the defense systems. And therefore, can we see that the body itself then ends up in this altered state. Instead of getting back to homeostasis, it then becomes highly triggered, causing a lot of the downstream symptoms in our bodies. And brain retraining is when we enable people to, when those generals come for their weekly meeting, they're saying, hey, we need all the resources. We've got to keep firing off our weapons of war. And that's where the retraining comes in, where you as the king or queen say, actually, the war is over. You can stand down. You can get back to standby mode. And that means that then the system calms itself down and is able to deal with these opportunistic infections far more effectively than in its overdrive mode. And that is one way of describing what may be happening in the body, and then also how we can treat it.
Very good.
Yeah, no, it's definitely fascinating because this is definitely a weight loss and weight management show. And your description can make it very clear how these things can affect just that function. And as far as metabolic syndrome occurs, like anything that it has in the world of inflammation and obesity. Can you just touch on that a little bit too? Why you constantly putting out these fires elsewhere in the body causes issues with weight and weight management?
Oh, yes. And these two things are very much linked, and I can describe how they're linked. So when we have excessive inflammation in the body, yeah, and that can be, as we've said, our own systems becoming hypersensitized, this will directly impact on our metabolic systems and also our ability in terms of to be able to lose weight, yeah, and weight management. And for instance, when we have these high inflammatory markers, this will also mean that, for instance, this will affect our sleep. So one example is sleep. So we know that when people are sleep deprived, then that causes even more inflammation, which then goes on to make it, for instance, for some people, harder to lose weight. So that's one example of where it can make an impact. Then secondly, with those heightened inflammatory markers, it can also mean that this impacts on our emotional system. So we know, for instance, a lot of anxiety and depression is very much linked to higher levels of inflammation. So that then means we may become more down, more depressed, and that becomes therefore harder to stick to any kind of regime that we may have thought is good for us or our practitioners supported us within. So there's so many impacts that changes in our defense systems can then have on our ability to lose weight.
So essentially, it's creating a mindset, a different type of mindset that can fend off and mitigate any issues that are going on in the body, correct?
I wouldn't call it mindset. Yeah.
Okay.
So interestingly, we like to differentiate between brain retraining and cognitive and behavioral approaches.
Yes, thanks.
So, and this is a really important thing, because otherwise people think, oh, we just saying it's in the mind, and obviously
Right.
we're not. So what actually happens here is, let's take the example of learning to drive a car. Yeah. Now, when you learn to drive a car, if you took a cognitive or behavioral approach, you would think, okay, if I'm really positive about driving this car and I let go of any negative thoughts, I'll be able to drive this car. Yeah. But of course, that's not the case. What we have to do is enact a process of repetition of an action. We have to move the steering wheel, press the gas, press the brakes, etc., repeatedly over 10, 15, 20 lessons until our nervous system has unconsciously learnt that automatically. And then we can be driving a car and we can eat a sandwich and listen to the radio. And we don't need to worry about driving the car because it becomes an automated process. And in the same way, what brain retraining is it's saying, let's create some new neural pathways in the brain through the power of some of these neuroplastic approaches, which are repetition, as an example. And therefore, a change of mindset is certainly useful, but this is through the power of this rewiring. So let's say someone has a stroke. We know that then a physical therapist will get that person to rehabilitate themselves. So let's say someone has a stroke and they lose control of an arm or a limb. They would then go through a process of rewiring, making new neuronal connections to be able to control those parts of their bodies through repetition. In a similar way, that's what we're doing, but more attributed to the immune system and nervous system itself.
So when people come to you for assistance, how do they actually enter your practice in essence? Like, what are they actually looking to solve initially? Is it something that they stumble upon eventually? Do they go through like numerous, I guess, doctor's visits who go through kinds of misdiagnosis at that point? So I'm just kind of looking at who actually walks into this practice to actually get these types of services.
Sure. So generally, people come to us when they've exhausted all of the routes, which is
Mm,
unfortunate. They then come to us and think, I wish I'd found this approach 5, 10 years ago, right? But generally, now we're getting a lot of referrals from integrative and functional medicine doctors, naturopaths, and nutritionists who heard about our program through their own patients. And their patients have said, hey, I've got 80, 90, 100% better using this brain retraining approach. And they've also obviously seen the medical studies that we've published and the randomized controlled trials. So generally, that's how people are finding us, through word of mouth and through practitioners learning about the program.
So as far as like symptomatically, like what are they presenting initially?
As it's mentioned, there's several categories, but generally, a lot of these conditions have many crossover symptoms. So
Gotcha.
fatigue, exhaustion, post-exertional malaise, where you may exercise or do an activity and then feel exhausted for days or weeks afterwards. That tends to be one kind of cluster of symptoms. So long COVID being the big one at the
Mm.
moment. I don't know if you're aware of this, but in the US now, long COVID is the largest source of absenteeism from work, which I find, just incredible. They estimate between 10 to 20 million Americans currently have long COVID. In the UK, it's about 1 or 2 million. And so it's a huge problem. And so that tends to be the main cluster. And then, as I mentioned, we have sensitivity reactions and opportunistic viruses, and also pain syndromes as well, like fibromyalgia and unexplained pain, for which people come to us for. And our aim is that instead of being the last resort, that we become the first resort.
Hmm.
That, because I feel that this is really the root cause of so many different conditions, if we can get people to discover this type of approach much earlier in their illness journey, then we can obviously prevent so much suffering that's going on out there right now.
Yeah, that was one of the things I was going to ask you is at what point do you think people should um, begin using your services versus should it be after the diagnosis of, say, Lyme's disease or before?
Yes, and this is a question that only a practitioner or the person themselves can answer. But as an
Hmm.
example, I don't know if you've heard of Dr. Neil Nathan, who's one of the foremost experts on Lyme and mold. And he now is recommending that patients do our program before any other interventions are enacted, simply
Hmm.
because people's bodies are so sensitive that when they try medications or supplements, there can be some positive effects, but then there's also counterbalancing effects in the body where they then have to prescribe other things. And sometimes to get the nervous system regulated enables the patient to better handle binders or medications or supplements. And so we
Okay.
have a both and approach that we work, harmoniously with practitioners to see what is the best package of approaches that can heal. And certainly with mold and Lyme, we are looking to initiate randomized controlled trials in those areas as well, to really see how we can tweak our program to have the best effect for those patients.
So can you walk us through a little bit about what your program actually looks like? What are some of the protocols that you employ to actually get such great results?
Of course, yes. So our program is done as a home study course with webinars. So people can go to our website or download the app, and there are interactive videos that they watch and exercises they perform, and also audio exercises. So there's about 20 to 30 audio exercises that accompany the videos. Then there are weekly webinars with myself, and then we've trained about 30 to 40 practitioners around the world who are able to see people one-on-one and support their journey. We have community options as well. But the real game changer that we just launched a few months ago, which has really made the big difference, is we know that patients are often isolated, right? And they're lonely. They've find it difficult to engage with normal life because of the degree of their symptoms. So we created something called daily Gupta Size, which are daily Zoom calls with one of our coaches to take them through the nervous system regulation, and then secondly through the brain retraining. And that is each weekday live on Zoom. And we have a few hundred people every day coming on board. And you can imagine the amazing community effect of having that resource every day. So you never feel like you're on your own. You've always got this to pop into and reinforce your retraining. And that has been a feature that's been, lots of patients have just loved it. Because some people are quite self-directed, right? So they can learn a program and put it into practice and apply it to themselves. And others, they prefer to be taken through it by a coach. So that aspect has been really incredible. So people who've normally taken 3 to 6 months to heal, their healing is shorter and shorter periods of time, which is great.
Could you share a success story or a particularly impactful case where your program has significantly improved somebody's health or life, rather? Quality of life, I should say.
Yes, absolutely. So, I mean, on our site, we have like, I think, nearly 500 people who've shared their story, their success stories. But one that's very poignant for me is there was a guy in New Zealand who had a range of different conditions, primarily fibromyalgia, but we know that they often come with other things. So he also had mold sensitivity. He was reacting to Lyme as well. And he was in his 80s, right? And there's a part of me that thought, well, look, someone who's 85, I think it was 84, could they really use our program to heal? Because they're obviously quite elderly and would have lots of other things going on in their lives. And he had these symptoms for 30 years, right? And he used our program and he got to about 80, 90% recovery. And obviously at that age, it's very difficult to know what is 100% recovery. But he felt completely fine as an 80, in his 80s. And I said, what are you going to do now? And he said, I'm going to travel the world. I'm going to do all the things that I haven't been able to do for the last 30 years. And I'm going to make the most of my life because I feel my energy has come back. And he traveled the world and he did so many amazing things. And that made me realize, wow, if a person in their early 80s can rewire their brain and heal themselves from 30 to 40 years of illness, then I believe that anybody can really make an impact on their condition. And that's really the hope of this approach.
That is wonderful.
So how do you feel the reception's been with these protocols? Just because, being a health and wellness show, it's usually something that people, the first thing they try to do is diet and exercise their way out of things. How has it been as far as the reception has gone for this particular program? And what are your thoughts about just that mentality in general?
Well, as you can imagine, I started this work 25 years ago in the mid-90s, where neuroplasticity and the idea that these conditions were in the brain was seen as ridiculous, right? And so we had to really battle with the medical profession at that time to even get acknowledged. They just dismissed it. And what's really interesting is that now, over the last few years, brain retraining has now come into the mainstream and become far more acknowledged as a potential mechanism to heal patients, and our underlying hypothesis is getting more accepted as well. And I think that, yes, diet and exercise. I mean, I think there are 4 or 5 key components of our overall health that can help us with health in general, but also with losing weight and also when we do have disease. And I call it the MEND protocol. So M is for mind, E is for exercise, N is for nighttime routine, D is for diet, and then we add an S, MENS, for social. And so that's the word mend with the S at the end. And you literally mend your body. So M, so most of the time, a lot of us have been focused on D for diet. So when we think of losing weight, immediately our attention goes, right, diet must be the obvious thing. And of course, that is an important component. And as you said, people move to the E for exercise. But I believe the M and the N, the nighttime routines, so that's sleep, and then the M for mind, are just as important in this process, and S for social as well. And therefore, when we combine, different aspects of the MEND protocol, we find that we feel happier, we feel healthier. It becomes a lot easier to then control our habitual responses to food and our habits and our intention to lose weight. And it also helps us fight off disease as well. So I think these are the kind of several important components. And so when we just focus on diet, or we just focus on exercise, we're not seeing the holistic approach. And therefore, we're trying to introduce more of this holistic approach into a wide variety of conditions.
And so we know that the mind-body connection is now just being recognized. And so how do you see the role of a holistic application like this, the Gupta program, evolving into mainstream healthcare in the future?
I think the secret, well, I said a secret, the obvious pathway is medical studies. And that is our and foremost aim. So we found that since we published our randomized controlled trials, we've had a lot more interest from mainstream medicine because most practitioners that we meet, they have a real challenge with these types of patients because they often can find protocols that will improve symptoms. But the moment someone has a stress in their lives, guess what? All the symptoms come flooding back. Yeah. And it's difficult to get that real long-term shift. And therefore, the ability to have an additional protocol that is showing this type of effect size has been, really positive for those practitioners. So my aim is that we now do larger scale studies, phase 2, phase 3 trials on the core illnesses that we treat, and then we spread it out to other conditions. So we have a lot of practitioners now, or some practitioners who are using it for autoimmune diseases as well, such as MS and Alzheimer's, and those types of conditions where we know there's an over triggering of the immune system, just like we gave the analogy of the Navy firing off too many bows and arrows. And then we also know that people have used our program for behavioral shifts and changes. So the one that we definitely know people have used it for have been eating disorders and also addictions. And I believe, well, many patients have said as a secondary effect, they've been able to use our program for weight loss as well. Now, we don't recommend it for that, as in, consciously, because we haven't done the study. So everything we want to do is study related. But we certainly believe that when people are having a real challenges with perhaps comfort eating, emotional eating, or developing those habits that require a certain amount of dedication, the brain retraining, the parts work that we do can be a great adjunct to their traditional methods of managing their weight.
I'm glad that you brought that part up because you did mention just triggering of like the immune system and these things that might come into our life that has this profound effect that these things come flooding back. Do you guys concentrate on any of the removal of those things? Like you said, you mentioned mold earlier and some of these toxins that could cause some of this cascade of issues that come flooding in eventually. Do you talk about that in your protocols as well as how to eliminate some of these things from actually coming back into a person's life who has issues with them?
We allow people to have other approaches from other practitioners as a complement to what we do. Yeah. Okay. So certainly people have the options to do that, but we don't specifically. And the reason is we believe that just like I gave you the analogy of the kingdom, the kingdom itself, if the resources in the kingdom are directed efficiently, our bodies are our own best detoxifier. Yeah. So as much as we might take external remedies to support detoxification, to bind, to enable us to fight off opportunistic infections, our bodies can do that the most effectively when it's put in the right state to heal, or what we call the optimal healing state. And as we said, if there are arrows falling back into the kingdom, our own immune system is impacting on our bodies, and then spies. So just to extend the analogy, spies can then get into the kingdom and start infiltrating the kingdom. Yeah. Now, what's the solution here? The solution here is to get the Army and Navy to become more efficient, to stand down in their overreaction, so that more resources can be pulled to the Secret Service. Now, I'm really extending the analogy here, but get more resources towards the Secret Service, who can then get into the kingdom and fight off and detoxify ourselves naturally from the spies who've managed to infiltrate within the kingdom. And so therefore, we have a lot of people with Lyme and mold who've been on that 5-10 year journey of going through binders, going through this, going through that. And some of them have improved for sure, but they've often not been able to fully get 100% well. But when they've come to our program, refined that nervous system and immune system, their bodies have naturally been able to detoxify, get into a parasympathetic state, clean up their systems. And that's when they've really seen themselves get their energy back.
No, I definitely love it. I definitely think that again, the more robust you create your body and to defend against all these things, the better obviously we'll be able to mount that particular defense and actually get the results that you show on a consistent basis. So we definitely want to thank you for being on the show. We want you to have an opportunity to just tell us where we can get more information on the Gupta program, how we can find out about all the new and updated information as far as like the trials and stuff that you guys are embarking on, and just give us your like website, social media handles, and anything that we can keep up with all the great things that you're doing.
Sure, thank you. So in terms of the information on our trials, just to let everyone know, we just published a clinical randomized controlled trial on long COVID, and that showed that our treatment was 4 times more effective than a wellness program. So the wellness program had diet, exercise, sleep.
Wow.
It was 4 times more effective at reducing fatigue and exhaustion, and twice as effective at increasing levels of energy. So that was a published study. And a couple of years ago, we published on fibromyalgia, and it showed that our program reduced fibromyalgia symptoms by 40% within 8 weeks and 0% in the control group, and halved anxiety and depression and many other great factors. So we'd love for people to explore our clinical studies, and they can join our free trial. So you can get into our program, download the app, play around with it, see what you think, lots of free content. So you can go to guptaprogram.com, which is our website, Gupta, guptaprogram.com, or you can go to App Store or Play Store and search Gupta Program and download the free app. And for the moment, the daily free nervous system regulation that I talked about is free to anybody on the planet. So anyone can join those daily sessions, and just that can be hugely beneficial.
Wow,
That is wonderful.
really.
Yeah. Super kind of you. So
Yeah.
thank you so much for joining us today. And, I'm sure you've opened my eyes, and I'm sure you've opened others as well.
Yes, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to be here, and I wish everyone the best with their health.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a great rest of the day.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of This Podcast Burns Fat. We're so excited to have you as a listener, and we're hoping that you really enjoyed the content as well. And if you did, please run over to iTunes and provide a rating and or review. It will go a long way in helping us continuously build our listenership up so that we can provide you with excellent content regarding fat loss, weight management, and just an overall healthy lifestyle. Thanks so much. Have a great night.